time for Jed to give his speech now. Hello, Jed. Thank you for being here. And I shortly introduce what you're doing and your product, KeystoneJS, and you can head over to your speech now.
Great. Hi. It's very cool to be here. Thank you for having me. My name's Jed. I'm in Sydney, Australia, and I've never given a talk at a meetup in Korea before. So this is my first time with an international audience. It's very cool to be here. I've got something I've been working on all year and before that to show you today, which ties in nicely with Prisma. And I've got two parts to the talk. I've got some slides that I would like to show you and a live demo that I'd like to show you as well. So I will launch in. If anyone would like to ask questions as we go or ask me to repeat or explain anything I go through in more detail, please feel free to shout out in the chat. And I will do my best to keep an eye on that as I go. Now, give me a second while I get Keynote to play nice with the streaming setup, and we'll be ready. Okay. Okay, great. Yep, I'm Jed Watson on the internet. If you've seen me around Twitter or GitHub, this is my username. I co-founded a company here in Sydney called ThinkMill about 8 years ago now. And we've done a lot of work with a lot of different companies. We are a consultancy with about 50 people. We focus a lot on React and GraphQL these days, and we build products for companies. We also do a lot of open source, and I've been very passionate about contributing to the open source ecosystem in JavaScript ever since ThinkMill was founded. I've built projects that you may have heard of or used before, including class names, React Select, and Keystone. The one that I'm talking to you about today is the new version of Keystone that we've been working on. Open source is an interesting thing. You tend to often start it as a side project, and then if you're lucky, it becomes popular and known, and then people start using it. And what you find is that it's very hard to keep up with a really popular project. Maintaining it is a bit tricky. And you need to think about how to support users and grow an audience and all of that. So this year for me, at ThinkMill, what we've done is actually put a full team of about 6 or 7 people behind Keystone to make it a really world-class option for GraphQL APIs and content management on top of Prisma. So we've been working on this new version for 9 months now, and we will be releasing it to GA or general availability in September. It's very exciting to be showing you all what we've been working on today. I've actually used Keystone in production across a number of projects at ThinkMill already this year. We have worked with companies and organizations like Rugby Australia. Rugby's almost our national sport. One of our largest fintech startups called Bright, and one of our largest of all time startups, Atlassian. We've produced Keystone-based systems for all 3 of these companies this year on the new platform. But I'm at a Prisma meetup. So to tie it back into Prisma, I like to sort of think of what we're doing with Keystone as a way to take this fantastic database API that Prisma gives us and make it internet ready. So by internet ready, what I mean is that Prisma is basically the API for your database. But as we just saw in the last talk with something like Nest.js, there's still quite a bit of work to do when you've got Prisma to expose APIs safely on the internet for public or authenticated users to use. So the sorts of things that are missing once you've got Prisma in place are user-facing management UI for that data, things like authentication and access control, as well as the business logic that makes your application, unique. Our apps aren't just databases on the internet. They're all sorts of functionality that we build on top of the database and that we expose to a front end. There are quite a few different projects in this space. It's been very cool this year watching a lot of different projects step in on top of Prisma, building on that platform to create higher level abstractions that we can build on. Some of the ones that I've sort of been looking at are things like Redwood and Blitz and Nest and Keystone. And these all have a different flavor. They all target a different type of application. Redwood and Blitz are both very full stack. They're sort of Rails-like for the JavaScript ecosystem. Nest is very much a full stack framework. You can build an API, but you can also render web pages with it. Whereas Keystone is more in the API plus CMS space. So I see this as a bit of a spectrum. And depending on which kind of app you're building or how you want to build it, I think it's great that there's a different project that's likely to give you a good experience using it. Of those four, Nest and Keystone are probably both the most similar and also the most different. And so to help put what I'm showing you in context, I thought I'd explain how I see the differences between Nest and Keystone. Nest is quite opinionated about how you're building something, but not what. So when I say how you're building, I mean, it comes with opinions about using TypeScript and writing decorators, and sort of it gives you a project structure, but you then end up implementing all of the functionality yourself from scratch within that structure. Interestingly, Keystone is also quite opinionated, but in a very different way. It's opinionated about what you're building, but not so much how you're building it. It gives you a lot of things out of the box that Nest doesn't, but which makes it sort of more opinionated, but it also gives you more functionalities, and you have to build less boilerplate with it. But once you start writing your own things into that app, it's actually less opinionated about how you do that. It doesn't have its own concept of decorators. It's much more low level when you're extending it. So they're quite different, but you can sort of use them to do the same things depending on what you want to spend your time focusing on. So let's have a look at what Keystone gives you and what sort of app it's good for. It gives you a GraphQL API and a session management system. It gives you access control, as well as hooks, extensions, and an admin UI. It does all of this out of the box for you, but you can replace the parts that you want different. So I like to think of it as most projects would need somewhere between, if what you're building is, you need an API for a front end, where the front end wants to be a single page app or React or Next.js or Vue or Nuxt or any of those, you want a GraphQL API on the back end for that. So if you're looking to build a GraphQL API where a lot of the data comes out of your database, and you probably want to use Prisma for that, and you're going to have session management and you need access control, I think Keystone's a great choice for projects like that. Whereas if what you were doing was creating microservices, something like Nest.js might be more appropriate for that, or if what you were doing was creating a GraphQL gateway on top of a lot of third-party services and you didn't have your own database and Prisma in the middle, Keystone's not really for that kind of project. So it's your traditional backend for a web app front end. That's what we've built it to make easy. Having an admin UI, it's also effectively a CMS. In fact, we describe it as a superpowered CMS for developers. And there are other great CMSs out there. 3 of my favorites are Sanity and Contentful and Dado CMS. These are all sort of really, really well-funded, large commercial content management systems of the new headless CMS generation. The trick with these is they're not always going to be a great backend for your application. They're hosted platforms, they're configurable, they're slightly extensible, but they're not programmable. You can't really change the backend, you can't interact with the database. It's hard to integrate them into your business logic. They're sort of just content stores and an admin UI. So Keystone is designed to sit at the middle point between these things, between application frameworks and content management systems. And in the way that in the last few years, this move towards using more APIs has let us focus on programming and deploying your own front end. If you've got backends like Firebase or Sanity or Contentful, the catch is that you can't really program them, and you can just configure them, which is quite limiting. And what we've found we want to do with our projects at ThinkMill and why we've written Keystone is so that we can program and deploy our own backend too, while still having it feel like that higher level system that we can sit on top of and get a lot of things for free that we didn't have to build again and again. So I'll show you what it looks like. Very, very simply, if you start a Keystone project, your package JSON would look like this. Keystone's just an open source package on NPM that you add to your dependencies with a CLI that's inspired by Next.js or Nuxt that you can use to run a web server and run a build system. You then create a keystone.ts entry point that exports the config. This is where we set up things like where to find our database and whether it's a Postgres or SQLite. Those options get passed through to Prisma behind the scenes. And you create a schema. So what we call tables or entities is lists. Lists have fields. And what you can see on my screen here is a simple schema with 2 lists in it, to do and user, with a simple set of fields. To-dos have label, is complete, assigned to. Users have name, email, password, and is admin checkbox and to-dos. And that's really all it takes to stand up a Keystone application. If we then run the CLI to start this project in dev mode, it will do a few things for us, including generating a GraphQL schema and a Prisma schema, applying the migration using Prisma Migrate, generating an admin UI, and then creating a server for us. So let's have a quick look at what it created for us. This is the Prisma schema. So your Keystone schema is a superset of Prisma's schema. It contains all the information that a Prisma schema does, plus extra bits to define things like access control and the admin UI, which means that it will generate a Prisma schema for you, which of course then gives us the Prisma client and the Prisma migrations framework. But it's not just the Prisma schema. The Keystone schema is also a superset of your GraphQL schema. So it generates your GraphQL types for you. And if you have ever created a GraphQL schema by hand, you'd know that this is not that hard to start off with, but they get very large and unwieldy. And for me personally, I find it really nice to have a single source of truth, keeping my database schema and my GraphQL schema in sync. So once Keystone started, you also get this admin UI. This is the to-dos and users app running. We can create to-dos in here. We can edit them. All of this UI is auto-generated for us based on the Keystone schema. We get a list view, of course, the ability to filter the lists, all of the things that you'd probably expect from a content management system. So this is that idea of having a single schema that's inspired by the headless CMS idea, except instead of having a user interface where you go in and create a new entity and add fields to it like you would with Contentful or Dado CMS, you have a TypeScript file that you can program and check into Git for source control that generates artifacts like a Prisma schema. So it's really this hybrid concept between hosted content management backends and doing everything from hand by hand, where you might have just seen the example with Nest.js. The third thing that Keystone gives you, aside from the backend schemas and the admin UI, is, of course, the GraphQL API. And this is the way that both that admin UI accesses the database behind the scenes, and it's also the way that your front-end app will access all of your functionality. So using this admin UI, we can query those fields that we've created, fetching all to-dos, label is complete, as well as related data like who the to-do is assigned to. We can count, we can update all of the sort of create, read, update, delete functionality that you would expect. And then you can start programming it. This is why it's so important to have the backend still in a programming language, even when you're getting a lot of this stuff for free. Because we can get that config and we can plug in something like an authentication framework to implement sessions. This sort of 18 or 10 lines of code that I've got highlighted on my screen now, this is enough for Keystone to give us a sign-in screen as well as sessions. And then when we're looking at the schema, what we can do is we can start adding, based on that session, access control. So what I've got here is a function that says that emails, you can only read an email if you're an administrator, because we should not give away email addresses publicly on the internet for all of our users. And the all of the create, read, and update permissions for the isAdmin flag, of course, we don't want people to be able to say, set themselves via the update user mutation to be an admin. So we're only letting anyone who is already an admin change the value of that flag on any of the records in the database. We can also do access control at the list level, so that what we're saying here is to update a user using the update user mutation, if you're not signed in, you can't update a user. Otherwise, you can either update a user if you're an admin or if you are that user. So someone could log in and change their own name or change their own email or password, but not somebody else's unless they're an admin. If they're an admin, they can change any of the user data in the system. And being able to express access control like this with functions is really very powerful. It lets us, when I said earlier that the idea is to sort of take Prisma and make it like internet ready, this is the core of that. You couldn't just expose your database to the internet. It's not secure. But with sessions and access control, we can automatically take that database and make it something that you can put publicly on the internet very safely, while still benefiting from all of the automated create, read, update mutations. We can also do access control like for a to-do list. Again, if you're not signed in, you can't change it. But if you're an admin or the to-do item is assigned to you, then you can change it. So the flexibility of this access control is actually really, it's very flexible. The last thing that I'll show you in here is other logic like hooks. So as you start implementing your own business logic for your application in here, then you can use the hooks to also program this schema to behave the way you want it to. In this example here, we've got a hook on the assigned to field of a to-do item. And that's resolve input hook. What that means is that when a to-do item is created or updated, if you're not an admin, it will always ensure that that to-do item is assigned to you. It's going to connect the current session user's ID to the assigned to field on the to-do list, on the to-do item. Whereas if you're an admin, of course, you can create to-dos and assign them to anyone. So that's some simple sort of logic that we've set up for this application. And of course, it can get a lot more sophisticated than that in some of the other cases we've used this for. So the fundamental idea that I've just shown you is that there's create, read, update, delete that you get for free. We didn't have to program those Prisma queries for the GraphQL resolvers. And they're safely integrated into access control. There's very little margin for error when we're implementing security. But that create, read, update, delete isn't going to work for your whole application. Applications get more complex than that over time. So the idea is that you gradually replace it. You can turn off maybe a create user mutation that Keystone's giving you and replace it with a more custom handle sign up mutation that might send a welcome email, validate a whole lot of fields, be more sort of specific in how it works. But in doing so, you don't lose the rest of the benefits of the CRUD schema. So where other systems like Rails in the past have given people the ability to scaffold code, which like writes it for you, but then it's up to you to go and edit it. As you replace the CRUD in Keystone, all the rest of it is going to stay up to date with your schema. So when I said that Keystone is less opinionated about how you extend it than something like Nest.js is, what I mean is we've tried to stick with all of the standards that are present in the open source community. So if you want to use the Prisma client, you can. But if you want to define some of your schema in just the same sort of type defs and resolvers format that Apollo server lets you write them in, then you can do that as well. Any tool out there on the internet for creating executable GraphQL schema can be integrated as an extension into Keystone schema, and they can even share the same types. So it's very flexible and actually not opinionated at all about how you're writing the parts of your application that matter to you. So this idea that you can program it, it's got custom fields that can query your database. You can put custom React views in the admin UI. You can write your own queries and mutations for your logic. And you can also get other microservices and stitch them into your schema. So I said before that Keystone's maybe not an ideal framework for creating microservices, but if you have microservices or third-party services that you're integrating with, and you still have like a primary database and one sort of main backend, then Keystone's actually very good at fitting into that architecture. We've used it in applications where you've got one primary data store, sort of like a platform, but then you've also broken out some complex and isolatable parts of that system into microservices in a hybrid model that takes the best parts of microservices and monolithic backends and actually lets you use the good parts of both. Keystone doesn't want to be a monolith like some of the more traditional backends that you would have maybe moved away from in the past. So an example of a more interesting admin UI screen is this. We've got a lot of different field types, like this status field is different kind of control for picking between enums. You can upload images, relationships, all this sort of stuff. We've also got a really cool document editor that I'll show you in the live demo portion. So I'll take you through a demo in a moment that's actually running on my computer, that's also open on GitHub that you can clone and have a play with yourself, that will explain all this a bit more. But just to wrap up the slides section, we really like this idea of leaning in on DevOps for a headless CMS. not ClickOps. It's not like in Content4 you have to go in and click around a live interface adding stuff. This way you can actually define your schema in code, check it into Git, get a branch preview deployment, run it in CI. Like this is all of that coming into your workflow, but also giving you all the power of Prisma and GraphQL and a React admin UI without limiting you in the same process. So that's the background to Keystone. It's demo time. I'll pause there for a second just in case there is any questions. I'll catch up with the chat here. Okay, cool. Doesn't look like any questions have been added so far. So on with the demo. What I'm going to show you is actually the backend that I set up for the workshop I did at Prisma Day back in June. It demos a lot of the things I just mentioned. And if you want to play along at home, this is on the internet, on GitHub, under, I think it's under my profile. Yes, it is. Okay, excellent. So KeystoneJS, oh no, it's under KeystoneJS. KeystoneJS / Prisma Day 2021 workshop. So, quick tour of the code base. I've taken a few things out so that I can live code them in for you and show you how some of these things are built up. But to start with, this is the Keystone entry point. I'll show you the app in a moment so you can see what we're creating, but the use case is a blog with posts and user polls, and the idea that we can insert polls into the content, and then users can sign in a Next.js front end and vote on answers in the poll. So we've also got the authentication and session control configured. And this is my main Keystone configuration being exported here. I'm going to start this now. I've linked it to a new database name that I don't have set up in my system so that I can show you what's going to happen the first time I run it. I'll also just quickly delete some generated artifacts. Okay. So in my package JSON, what we've got here is actually two different applications in the same repo. The first one is a Keystone application, which I can run using yarn dev. And then I've also got a Next.js app in the same repo, which I can run using Next.dev. And in other projects, normally we might use a mono repo, or we might have the front ends in a different repo to the back end. I've just put them together in the same repo for this demo to make it a bit simpler, but you're really looking at two applications running side by side. There are the Keystone packages and the Next.js packages. Now, first thing I'm going to do is start the Keystone backend. This is going to have a look at, wait, before I do that, I'll delete these just to show you what that looks like too. Hang on. Okay, great. Let's run this again. It's generating the GraphQL and the Prisma schemas for me. It's also created, thanks to Prisma, it's created the Prisma Day Workshop Korea database for me. And then it said that there's been a change. So because it's a new database and I didn't have any migrations before, it's saying that this schema requires a migration. So I'll type in a name for that in it. And this is using Prisma Migrate behind the scenes. It's now generated a migration for me. So the new files here are the Prisma schema, the GraphQL schema, and this first migration. And it's prompting me to apply the migration. I will. That database is up to date. And now it's using Next.js. So the admin UI that we generate is a Next.js app. And now Next.js is building the client-side bundles for that. Our admin UI and our GraphQL API are ready, which means I can open them on port 3000. I've got no users in the database yet. It's prompting me to create one. This is actually a configurable thing. If we come back to the Keystone entry, you'll see where I've used our auth package. I've told it to init first item, and I've told it to prompt for the name, email, and password. And when I create a new user, I'll just add myself here. Here we go. Behind the scenes, it's also been set up to create a new role named super user with the permissions to manage content and manage users. And I've done that because the way that access control is set up in the schema, if I hadn't, then I would have been able to sign in, but I wouldn't have been able to see anything. So here's that first user that it created for me. And that user is linked to the super user role here, which has all of the permissions that I've defined in my system. So that's the getting started experience and how this runs. Let's have a look at the users part of this now. Like I said, I've got some access control plugged in, and the way this is designed, you'll notice that even the permissions is something that you have control over. It's the big innovation with headless content management systems was that you no longer had a built-in concept of pages or content or a site in your CMS. You just got to define schema and then query it. So all of the structure of the site was up to your front end. And that's been a really interesting transition because a lot of people now had to go, well, I'm going to create a pages list. I'm going to create a blog articles list because there's not a built-in concept of that. Keystone takes that and applies it to the system as well. We don't have a built-in concept of users. We don't have a built-in concept of roles. You actually get to define that for yourself. So we have a user list here, which could contain anything. But in this case, it has a name, email, password, a role, as well as some links to authored posts and poll answers. I'll make that larger just so it comes through more easily on the stream. Sorry about that. And then we also created roles. So we decided to add checkboxes for users being able to manage content and users here that we can check in our permissions functions. But that could also be anything. We could you can have whatever you want in your roles for that. So the access control looks like this. We have permissions that just check those fields for can manage content and can manage users. And then we bind those to the right places. We also tell the admin UI that if you can't manage users, to hide the create button because you wouldn't have permission to create users. So just to demo that, what I'll do is I'll create a new role. Actually, I'll go and create a new user. Here we go. Let's say I have a content author user. Whoops. Don't know why I just got hot reloaded. Content author. And I'll also create a new role for this user called content managers that can just manage content. And I'll create both of them. What I can do now is open a new private window. And I can log in with content@demo.com. And now you'll notice that I can't even see roles in the navigation. If I put these two browser windows side by side, as an admin, I can see roles, whereas as a content author, I can't. And as an admin, when I come in and look at this record compared to a content author, this data, I can't change it. I don't get the fields. They're in fact even hidden. Whereas if I come into my own, I can see and change some of the fields, but not all of them. For example, my content author can't see the role or other relationships in here, but I can change my email and my password because of the access control. Whereas a content author here can come in and do all the things that they need to do relating to content. So we can create a first post. It's published. Pick today's date. Setters themselves. And there we go. Cool. So content authors can create posts. I'll close the private window and we'll just go back to doing the rest with my main user. But that's a good idea around the access control. Oh, actually something else that I want to show you quickly is if I jump into the API Explorer, you'll notice that when I'm logged in as myself, I can query all users, name, email, and let's just get that. Open up another private window and come to the same login again. Right. Open up my GraphQL playground and get the same query. You'll see what I'm getting is, if we collapse these errors, I'm not able to read this other user's email because of the access control. So the same access control that is securing this admin UI is also securing our public API. And it's all being centrally defined in the Keystone schema. We're also getting an errors piece of data alongside our query results in GraphQL that explains that we couldn't see that information, which is great because we can either ignore that and just present the information we can, or we can see, hey, this user doesn't have access to this thing that the UI seems to expect they should be able to see. We can even query the role. And of course, that's escalated the errors here because we're getting nulls because the user on the right doesn't have permission to read roles at all, whereas the user on the left has full permission to read the roles. So that's, yeah, that's a pretty comprehensive view over like the different parts of what you get out of the box with users and access control. To close that loop, you'll see in the users file, that email, the read access is this can manage user function, which simply looks at the permissions. If they can manage users, return true. Otherwise, if they are the same item, return true. Otherwise, return false. And this permissions can manage users is going to look in the session at data.role.canManageUsers. And to close the loop on that, the session is being populated back in our entry point by this configuration for our auth package, which says, for anyone who signs in, load the session data. This is a GraphQL fragment. ID, name, role, can manage content, and can manage users. So that is the same as if in the GraphQL API, I've got users, and I've just pasted that in like this. So this is the data that's being loaded and put into session for us to use in our session management functions. Now, next little piece of this demo that I wanted to give you is how we can start extending this with custom stuff and how we can even integrate it with other things on the internet. So I'm going to add a field to users. Let me just come back, close this window again. I really don't need that anymore. And all right, so I'm going to add something to users called GitHub username so that we can store the GitHub username of each user in our system. Adding something to the schema looks like this. I'll come down here under the role and I'll add a GitHub. See if I can mostly get this right without copying and pasting. I'm just pulling up my reference on the other screen. So GitHub username, that'll be a text field. And I'm going to give it, I'm going to proper case GitHub in the admin UI by giving it a label. Git has a capital H. And I'm going to attach the same permissions to it as other fields have, so that in the item view, you can either edit yourself or read it. And that's all we need to do to add something to the admin UI and to the database and the GraphQL API. Come into my terminal and restart the server now. So I'll just commit what we've done before. So you can see the diffs. Okay, we've now generated a new update to our GraphQL schema. We can see the GitHub username is coming out. We've also generated an update to our Prisma schema. You can see the GitHub username has been added here. It's also prompting us to generate a migration. So we'll call out add GitHub username and we'll apply it. And now once the admin UI rebuild process is finished in Next.js, we should be able to log in and see that. Check it out. There's the GitHub username field. So far, so good. And of course, in my GraphQL API, I can now select name and GitHub username. That's coming out there too. What I really want to do, what would be even cooler than just knowing the GitHub username, is knowing what GitHub repos that user has. And this is where we can stitch in additional GraphQL schema. And we're going to integrate GitHub's public API, which is a REST API, and integrate it into our GraphQL schema as a GraphQL API. And it's not going to take too many lines of code. I'll show you how this works. Next thing I want to do is get a virtual field. And I'm just going to copy and paste this so you don't have to watch me typing it all out from hand. Under GitHub username, okay, this is what we need. I'm going to import the virtual field type from Keystone. And I'm going to import the schema creation type from Keystone as well. I need that. And I need to, of course, create my GitHub repo GraphQL type and the resolver to fetch it. So I've left these in here. I didn't delete them so that I don't have to copy and paste too much. But what we've got here is, we'll start with the resolver. I've got a GitHub repos resolver, which is going to call GitHub's public REST API. It's going to use the fetch API to do that. And then once it's got the JSON back, it's going to filter out any private or disabled or fork repos and sort them by stargazers and then return them. It's going to do all that based on the item and the GitHub username field that we added in the last step. So I've got that GitHub repos resolver function. And then the schema for that, which I took based on GitHub itself, is these fields. So I'll just need to import them here.
I'm sorry, Jed, but I think it's almost time now. And thank you for, you can still continue, but it's really awesome presentation.
No
how much minutes do you need more to finish up your latest demo?
Probably 2.
Okay.
I'm about 2 minutes away.
Okay.
Let's get our repos.
Take your time.
Yeah. Okay, that should work. Restart this. Oops. I'll skip the next step that I was going to build up separately and just drop the entire lot in. Okay, what I've also done is add some custom components for the admin UI here. So we can use React to create a custom component for rendering that data in the admin UI too. And now we should get my favorite part of this demo as soon as it loads. Come on, Next.js. Fingers crossed. All right, the live demo looks like it's going to work. So if I put my username in here and save it, it's now pulling out the GitHub repos and using a custom renderer to show that for us. And closing that loop, if I reload my playground, I can now get GitHub repos and the stargazers count and probably a full name and various other things from GitHub. And that's like taking GitHub's REST API and meshing it into our GraphQL API integrated with Keystone's data extensible.
Awesome.
Yeah, and I'll close the demo there. But thanks for letting me show you all that stuff. That was it. My last slide was just thanks. This is me on the internet, and where you can find out more about Keystone.
Yeah, thank you so much for your presentation. And I'm also going to try Keystone soon. We also have one question. If you don't want the error to be thrown, can you change that? So I think you're using some middlewares like GraphQL Shield to manage the protective resolvers. But how do you think you can not throw the error from the middleware?
We're using Apollo's GraphQL errors standard for that, and we're adding. There will be a release in about 2 weeks from now with a lot more control over both the GraphQL, what's included and not, as well as the way that access control comes out. So if you don't want to see the errors, we've been adding an option for that to suppress it So you could either add your own GraphQL middleware to Apollo server, which would be possible, or we've got a big community Slack going for Keystone. So if you want to try it, jump into Slack and have a chat with us about edge cases like that. And it's really great hearing from users about what, you know, people's experience are and how to keep improving it.
Okay, so I think there's another question. Custom GitHub schema is manually maintained. So could you answer that also? Or should you ask the community?
In reality, what I would do is use GitHub's SDK and import the types from that. You could also just stitch in GitHub's GraphQL API is probably more appropriate. What I wanted to show there was if you had, let's say, another internal service, like we've built one project where there's a Keystone app, but there's an existing identity service that we wanted to connect with. So if you've got your own app, you could define that, like, it's just JavaScript. So anyway, you could import those types from, you can import them and then plug them into Keystone. So the fact that I handcrafted that GitHub repo schema is just to show you what it would look like. Whereas if you had that same information anywhere else in an SDK or something, you could just import it and use it the way you would in any JavaScript application.
Okay, thank you for your answer. I have one last question. This is for myself. So Keystone is actually the CMS which can control the service layer database. So you have your own authentication in the CMS server, and it's gonna control the whole database in service layer. So how confident is it to protect the other side of database? So the users can also manipulate the data at the service side.
So very confident is the answer. It's actually not, it's tricky because we call it a CMS and it can be used as a CMS, but it's actually an API service. So all of that access control is what we've spent the most time building, making sure that it's really, we have thousands of tests covering that, and covering the query generation with Prisma as well. In fact, in Prisma's last release, there was an edge case bug that our test suite managed to catch. It's very comprehensive. And so it's been, we've got a large amount of trust in it, and it's been stable for like 2 years now. In terms of fitting into that service layer, what we did recently with the Atlassian project is they have their own authentication layer, which is implemented at the network layer. Keystone doesn't manage the session or the authentication in that case. That auth package is built as a plugin, and you can kind of clone it and build a different plugin. So in the Atlassian project, what we did was read the headers on the request that were injected by the auth service layer in the networking system, and then just pass that through to the resolvers where we can implement the access control checks. So it's more powerful than it sounds like at the start if you're just describing it as a CMS. But if you're interested in like more going into, we don't sort of have time to go into the depth of that today, but if you're interested in learning more, there's a lot of conversation again in our Slack channels about that sort of stuff. So I just wanted to let you know that it's possible.
Okay. Oh yeah, thank you so much for your answer again. So I think it's our time to finish up. And thank you for joining us. Really appreciate your presentation. And yeah, I think you're really great. The Keystone is a really great project. And I'm also interested today, so I might have to try it out soon. And thank you for your time. And so yeah, the next thing, I'm going to speak in Korean again to finish up this meetup.
Thank you very much for having me, everyone.
Yeah. 네, 다른 분들이 다 모여가지고 이제 인사를 나누면 참을 것 같은데 저만 인사를 대표로 하는 입장이라서 좀 아쉽게 됐습니다. 예, 그래도 너무 좋은 발표였고 너무 큰 프로젝트고 너무 훌륭한 프로젝트라서 제가 네, 이렇게 소개를 받는 입장에서도 되게 좀 영광스럽네요. 네. 그래서 마지막으로 이제 종료를 하기 전에 그 프리즈마 쪽에서 선물을 준비를 했는데요. 중간에 어떤 프로 같은 걸 했을 것 같아요. 예. 그래서 제가 당첨자분을 호명을 할 겁니다. 예. 철정리님이라고 계신가요? 혹시 좀 계시면은 어떻게 해야 될까요? 네, 철정리님, 그 영어로 CHEOLJUNGLEE 분이시거든요. 네, 괜찮으시면은 저한테 트위터를 좀 남겨주시면은 이제 그분께 거예요. 이 프리 제작한 이제 책이랑 뭐 그런 굿즈 같은 것들을 제공해 드릴 예정입니다. 네, 잠시만요. 오케이. 그리고 마지막으로 이제 제드님께서 그 요청을 주셨는데요. 키스톤 JS 레포에 들어가셔서 스타를 좀 달아주면 감사하겠다고 하십니다. 네. 그래서 너무 훌륭한 발표를 해주신 분께 이제 보답으로 네, 뭐 원하시면 이게 자율적으로 이제 해주시면 될 것 같고요. 네, 저도 이제 조만간 CMS를 만들어야 돼서 관심 있게 지켜보던 프로젝트 중에 하나였습니다. 네, 축하드립니다. 이게 답변 감사하고요. 답변 확인했고 저한테 트위터로 이제 이제 트윗만 조금 걸어주면 감사할 것 같고요. 네, 오늘 참여해 주셔서 너무 감사드리고 앞으로 프리즈마 미더블 2달이나 3달에 한 번씩 분기별로 좀 해보려고 해요. 네, 그 이유는 뭐 여러 국내 좀 그런 커뮤니티라던가 개발자 발표 같은 것들은 여러 차례 있는 걸로 알고 있는데 이제 해외 개발자분들이랑의 저점이 되게 부족한 것 같아서요. 이제 좀 프리즈마를 통해서 이제 다양한 외국의 훌륭한 개발자분들이랑 소통할 수 있는 그런 채널을 많이 만들려고 노력을 하고 있습니다. 프리즈마를 통해서요. 네. 다들 프리즈마 오늘 했던 내용들 제가 조금 더 상세하게 정리해서 이메일로 공유드리도록 할 거고요. 다시 한번 여기서 인사드리고 이제 마치면 될 것 같습니다. 네, 참여해 주셔서 감사하고 남은 주말 잘 보내시길 바랍니다. 네, 감사합니다.